History is not short of brutal kings. It has seen despots, usurpers, mad tyrants, and cold tacticians. But among the cruelest monarchs of medieval Europe, few inspire the same mixture of horror and fascination as Peter of Castile. He wasn't a warlord from the fringes of civilization. He was a legitimate Christian monarch, ruling a powerful kingdom in what is today Spain. He is remembered not for grand reforms or glorious conquests, but for acts of savagery that stunned even his contemporaries. One incident in particular has echoed through time, a moment of vengeance so grotesque it borders on the unbelievable. According to historical accounts, Peter learned that his estranged queen had taken a lover. Instead of confronting her, he had the man executed in secret, cooked his flesh, and served it to the queen for dinner. Only after the meal did he reveal what she had eaten. Whether fully true or embellished, the episode became a symbol of his reign, one ruled by cruelty, paranoia, and absolute control. Yet it is not merely the act itself that made history gasp, but the context in which it occurred, the cultural, diplomatic, and psychological weight it carried. Chroniclers such as Pero López de Ayala, who served the Trastamara dynasty that supplanted Peter, wrote of the incident in tones of horror and condemnation, using it as a moral cautionary tale against tyranny. Foreign ambassadors reported rumors of the event with a mixture of revulsion and awe, reinforcing Peter's growing reputation in European courts as a man capable of almost theatrical monstrosity. In England and France, kingdoms deeply entangled in the 100 Years' War, Peter's tale became a political football. To the French, the humiliation and alleged poisoning of Blanche, their kin, was a scandal that demanded retribution. The English, who would later support Peter for their own strategic gain, cautiously distanced themselves from the most grotesque aspects of his legend, even while recognizing his potential as a pawn against French interests. The story rippled far beyond Castile. In the Italian city-states, where Renaissance humanism was beginning to bud, diplomats recorded the affair in coded reports. In Avignon, where the papacy resided, the episode was cited in complaints against Peter's treatment of church allies. The story was retold in monastic chronicles, dramatized in allegorical texts, and in some cases used as a symbolic reference to the consequences of unrepentant sin. In the centuries that followed, this infamous dinner became more than history. It became lore, fused into the cultural memory of Spain and Europe. Plays, ballads, and moral treatises would use it as shorthand for unchecked royal power. Whether or not the dinner took place exactly as described, its emotional truth, that a king could feed death to his queen with cold deliberation, was too compelling to be dismissed. But who was Peter the Cruel? What made a man, a monarch, choose such a horrifying path to vengeance? And how did this one gruesome meal become a metaphor for an entire reign? Peter was born on September 30th, 1334, in the city of Burgos, the de facto capital of Castile. He was the only legitimate son of King Alfonso XI and Queen Maria of Portugal. Yet from the moment of his birth, his claim to the throne was overshadowed by a deeply entrenched and toxic dynamic in the royal family. For over 2 decades, Alfonso XI openly favored his mistress, Leonor de Guzman, a powerful noblewoman, over his lawful wife. Leonor bore him 10 children, many of whom were granted lands, titles, and positions of influence during Alfonso's reign. This dynastic rivalry planted the seeds of civil war even before Peter ever touched a crown. The royal court was bitterly divided between supporters of the queen and those loyal to Leonor's children, particularly the eldest, Enrique of Trastamara. This division was not just personal. It shaped policy, appointments, and power dynamics throughout the realm. Factionalism became institutionalized. When Alfonso died in 1350, a sudden victim of the Black Death while laying siege to Gibraltar, the throne passed to the 16-year-old Peter. Immediately, the fragile balance shattered. Queen Maria, long humiliated and marginalized, struck swiftly, She had Leonor arrested and executed without trial. This act enraged Leonor's children and their powerful noble backers. From that moment, Peter's reign would be contested not just politically, but emotionally, rooted in revenge and dynastic vengeance. The Castile Peter inherited was not a unified or prosperous realm. The Black Death had ravaged towns and villages, killing between 30% and 50% of the population in some regions. Agricultural collapse, inflation, and labor shortages crippled the economy. The social order was fraying, and traditional feudal bonds between lords and vassals were breaking under the pressure of survival. To make matters worse, Castile faced external pressures on nearly every border. To the east lay the Crown of Aragon, a rival maritime power with competing interests in the Mediterranean. To the south remained the Emirate of Granada, a Muslim stronghold still resisting the Christian Reconquista. To the north, Navarre and France had their own designs, and within, powerful noble families such as the Lara, Haro, and Trastamara clans formed shifting alliances to assert dominance. Peter understood that survival depended on centralizing power. From the outset, he pursued reforms that would strengthen the monarchy at the expense of the nobility. He sought to increase royal revenues, reduce corruption in municipal governments, and expand the administrative bureaucracy. Many of his appointments favored individuals of lower noble rank, professional administrators, or members of minority communities, especially Jews who had long served as royal financiers and scribes. This pragmatic policy won him capable servants, but earned him deep resentment from the traditional aristocracy and the church. His Jewish allies were vilified as symbols of his illegitimacy. Propaganda spread portraying Peter as a heretic, a tyrant, and a danger to Christian order. Rumors circulated that he practiced sorcery, consorted with demons, or planned to convert to Judaism. Meanwhile, Peter's personal traits fed into these anxieties. He was brilliant but mercurial, passionate but unforgiving. Known to shift from generosity to wrath with little warning, he inspired both admiration and terror. His court became a place of constant suspicion. Espionage, betrayal, and assassination were regular tools of governance. Yet it must be said, Peter was not entirely without principle. He genuinely sought to bring justice to the realm, often intervening in disputes between peasants and lords in favor of the former. He took steps to curb the excesses of feudal privilege, and in matters of law, he supported reforms that limited arbitrary confiscation of property. But the more he pushed for order, the more chaotic things became. Every reform birthed a new enemy. Every execution made another family into rebels. Peter's reign was a pressure cooker, and the kingdom's nobility, clergy, and foreign rivals were all waiting for it to explode. In a bid to secure foreign support and bolster legitimacy, Peter entered into a marriage alliance with France. He was wed by proxy to Blanche of Bourbon, a cousin of King John II of France. The alliance was orchestrated by Peter's advisors in the French court, who hoped that the union would stabilize Castile and cement French influence on the Iberian Peninsula. Blanche was young, only 16 years old, and came from one of France's most prestigious houses. The marriage was celebrated in Burgos, but something was wrong from the very beginning. Peter refused to consummate the marriage. The king appeared distracted, even dismissive during the ceremonies. He left shortly after the wedding and did not return. Peter's heart already belonged to another, Maria de Padilla, a young Castilian noblewoman of great charm and intellect. Peter and Maria had been lovers long before his political marriage, and he never truly abandoned her. Some sources even claim that Peter had secretly married Maria in 1352, a year before his wedding to Blanche, although no contemporary records conclusively prove this. When Blanche arrived in Castile in 1353, she was met not with celebration, but suspicion. Within days of their official wedding ceremony, Peter left her behind, returning to Maria. He accused Blanche of engaging in conspiracies with the nobles and of attempting to betray him, claims that were never substantiated, and which appear to have been politically convenient rather than grounded in fact. Peter then ordered that Blanche be placed under guard. Her status became increasingly ambiguous, nominally a queen, but in practice a prisoner. She was confined to various castles in northern Castile, including Medina, Sidonia, and Sigüenza. She had no court, no freedom of movement, and no contact with her homeland. The French court protested vehemently. Blanche's father, Peter I, Duke of Bourbon, was enraged. He demanded justice for his daughter and compensation for the perceived insult to his house. King John II of France sent envoys to Castile, appealing to the Pope to intercede. Pope Innocent VI issued a directive demanding Peter honor the marriage, but the Castilian king ignored it. The scandal strained relations with France and made Peter a pariah in some diplomatic circles, but it also emboldened him. From that point forward, he ruled less as a consensus builder and more as an authoritarian, dismissing foreign pressure as interference in his domestic affairs. At the same time, internal purges intensified. Nobles connected to the Bourbon family were arrested or executed. Peter's paranoia deepened, and his court became a place of whispered accusations and swift retribution. Lands were seized, titles revoked. Those who dared express sympathy for Blanche risked losing everything. And Maria de Padilla's influence over Peter grew stronger. She was more than a mistress. She was his advisor, confidant, and political ally. She bore him 4 children: Beatrice, Constance, Isabella, and Alfonso. Peter would later attempt to legitimize them, naming Constance as a potential successor and arranging her marriage to John of Gaunt, son of King Edward III of England. These acts further complicated Peter's political web, intertwining his family with English dynastic ambitions. But while Maria thrived at court, Blanche languished in captivity. Her letters to the Pope and French nobles paint a bleak picture of isolation, illness, and fear. She was denied medical care, her food was restricted, she was allowed no visitors except for guards. In such conditions, rumors were inevitable. Stories began to circulate that Blanche had found solace in the arms of a guard, a servant, or a fellow noble in exile. Some versions suggest romantic affection. Others claim coercion or survival-driven complicity. No definitive proof exists, but the mere suggestion of infidelity, however implausible, was enough to ignite Peter's fury. Whether Peter truly believed the rumors or used them as a pretext for vengeance remains debated. But what followed would become one of the most infamous episodes in royal history, and one of the darkest intersections of love, power, and cruelty ever recorded. The details of what happened next vary from source to source. Medieval chroniclers, writing decades later and often with political agendas, differ in the names and specifics, but the core narrative remains. Peter, upon hearing of Blanche's supposed affair, responded not with a trial, but with execution. The man, whether a noble named Fadrique or a lowly servant, was seized and imprisoned. Some sources suggest torture, others simply state that he disappeared into the bowels of the castle. What is agreed upon is this: Peter ordered that the man be killed, his body dismembered, and the flesh cooked. In the kitchens of the royal fortress, likely Medina Sidonia or Arevalo, chefs were given unholy instructions. The body was rendered into meat, prepared with sauces and spices. The flesh, indistinguishable from traditional game or mutton, was plated and presented. Contemporary descriptions, though often colored by political motivations, speak of the methodical nature of this act. Peter was not content with the mere elimination of a rival. He wanted his vengeance to penetrate the emotional and psychological realm. This was not execution. It was a message. It was theater. The preparation of the meal itself is recounted in some texts with unsettling precision. According to one version, Peter supervised the early stages of the punishment, ensuring the act was carried out in total secrecy with only the most trusted kitchen staff involved. The meat was marinated to disguise any peculiarities in texture. The bones were burned or buried, leaving no evidence. That evening, Blanche dined. Alone in a room cold with suspicion, she was served what she believed to be a royal delicacy. Isolated, humiliated, perhaps emotionally numb, she partook of the meal. Accounts suggest she found the food peculiar, but tasty. She asked no questions. Only after she had eaten did Peter arrive. He informed her, with calculated coldness, that the man she had loved, or was merely rumored to have loved, was now inside her. That her betrayal had been punished and she had become part of it. This story, circulated by Peter's enemies and later reinforced by the Trastamara dynasty, became legend. Chroniclers seized on its horror. Ayala, who served the victorious Trastamaras, wrote that this episode illustrated Peter's madness and cruelty, that no woman, even a queen, was safe from his sadism. Foreign diplomats referenced the dinner in private correspondence as an example of the depravity gripping the Castilian crown. There is no record of Blanche's immediate reaction, only silence. And then, in the years that followed, her health declined. She died in 1361, possibly poisoned, possibly by illness, still a prisoner. She was buried without ceremony. Later chroniclers embellished the tale. Some claimed Peter laughed as he delivered the news. Others suggested Blanche attempted to starve herself afterward. A few even speculated that the story was allegorical, a metaphor invented to represent Peter's total domination over his queen. Modern historians remain divided. Some interpret the story as a grim example of political myth-making, a propaganda tool used to dehumanize Peter after his death. Others argue that the king's documented behavior elsewhere supports the plausibility of the event. He was, after all, a man known for burning prisoners alive, executing entire noble families, and ordering assassinations without remorse. But whether literal or symbolic, the dinner captured something essential about Peter's rule. The deliberate fusion of personal betrayal and statecraft, the transformation of vengeance into spectacle. For Peter, justice was not just served, it was plated, seasoned, and consumed. It is likely that this event, or its perception, accelerated Peter's fall. The European courts, already uneasy with his treatment of Blanche, were now convinced of his unfitness. The incident became a rallying cry for his enemies, both within and outside Castile. This wasn't just a crime. It was a legend. And legends have a way of outliving kings. The murder of Blanche's alleged lover and the grotesque dinner further alienated Peter from the European courts. France, outraged, began supporting Enrique of Trastamara's claim to the throne. The Pope, though cautious, leaned toward the rebels. Papal legates wrote that Peter's crimes were unfit for a Christian monarch and that he had desecrated the image of holy kingship. Peter's excommunication was considered more than symbolic. It gave moral cover to rebellion. Within Castile, the kingdom was unraveling. Nobles, once loyal, now feared for their lives. Others saw an opportunity to overthrow the king and reclaim autonomy. The aristocracy, already uneasy with Peter's centralization policies, now viewed Enrique as a vehicle to restore their influence. Even cities that had once benefited from Peter's reforms began to distance themselves, wary of the looming chaos. In 1366, Enrique invaded Castile from the north with the support of France and Aragon. His forces were bolstered by the mercenary companies, notorious soldiers of fortune displaced by the temporary lull in the 100 Years' War. Led by the feared Bertrand du Guesclin, these professional killers ravaged the countryside as they marched. Peter was caught unprepared. He fled south with what remained of his loyal guard, seeking support from England. His appeals reached the court of Edward, the Black Prince of Wales, who had command over Aquitaine. The English crown, eager to counter French expansion and gain a foothold in Iberia, agreed to assist. In 1367, Edward led a combined Anglo-Castilian force into Spain. The ensuing Battle of Nájera was a spectacular victory for Peter. Enrique's forces were routed, and he barely escaped with his life. Peter, triumphant, returned to the throne. But the cost was steep. The English demanded repayment for their aid, gold, grain, and strategic concessions. Peter could not deliver. His treasury was empty. Castile, bled by war, famine, and corruption, was in no position to pay. Edward returned to England, disillusioned and ill. English support evaporated. Peter's paranoia deepened. He turned on former allies, accusing them of collusion with Enrique. Executions resumed. Cities rebelled. Loyalist governors defected. By 1368, Enrique had regrouped, this time with even broader support from France and the Aragonese crown. His second invasion met little resistance. As Enrique advanced, Peter's realm collapsed town by town. Burgos, Valladolid, Toledo, cities that had once declared loyalty now opened their gates to the usurper. The nobility either fled or changed sides. The church, too, largely abandoned Peter, casting him as an unredeemable sinner. In March 1369, Peter made his final stand in the fortress of Montiel. Surrounded, he attempted secret negotiations with Du Guesclin, offering bribes and promises. Du Guesclin pretended to cooperate and betrayed him. Peter was captured and brought to Enrique. The meeting between the two brothers was dramatic. According to chronicler Jean Froissart, Peter rushed Enrique with a dagger, attempting to kill him. The two men wrestled in the flickering torchlight. Du Guesclin allegedly stood back and said, "I don't kill kings," before letting Enrique finish the deed. With a knife to his throat, Peter the Cruel was stabbed in the heart by his own blood. His corpse was displayed for days before being hastily buried. Enrique was crowned King of Castile shortly thereafter. His reign would mark the beginning of the Trastamara dynasty, a line that would unify Spain, sponsor Columbus, and reshape Europe. But Peter's ghost lingered. For years, rumors circulated that he had survived and escaped. Impostors appeared across Europe claiming to be the true King of Castile. Rebellions briefly flared, but none succeeded. The age of Peter was over, but the legend had only just begun. With Peter's death, the Trastamara dynasty began a new chapter in Spanish history. They worked diligently to rewrite Peter's legacy, painting him as a monster. The dinner story, whether true or not, was repeated, exaggerated, and immortalized. From royal charters to ecclesiastical sermons, Peter became the cautionary tale of unrestrained monarchy. Yet history is never so simple. Jewish communities in Castile remembered Peter as a protector. He had resisted anti-Semitic mobs and refused to adopt policies that would segregate or persecute Jews, a stance that infuriated the church and many nobles. He granted them legal protections and reaffirmed their right to live and work freely in Castilian cities. For this, Jewish chroniclers referred to him as El Justiciero, the Just One. Peter's efforts to modernize Castile's administration also left their mark. He strengthened the authority of the crown by reducing the power of hereditary noble offices. He promoted the use of written contracts and legal codification. His chancery produced more documents than any Castilian monarch before him, and his court became a center for legal innovation and multilingual administration. Still, these reforms came at a price. His adversaries interpreted his policies as attacks on tradition. His favoritism toward minorities, lower nobles, and professional bureaucrats isolated him from the elite. His aggressive tactics ensured that the moment his power waned, there would be no one left to defend him. After Peter's death, the Trastamaras not only took his throne but his historical narrative. Chroniclers like Pero López de Ayala reshaped public memory. They compiled detailed accounts of Peter's supposed cruelties, some factual, others invented, to justify Enrique's rise and sanctify his rule. Foreign commentators, too, absorbed this version of Peter. In Italy, he was invoked in comparisons with tyrants from antiquity. In England, his alliances were remembered with ambivalence, overshadowed by the disturbing tales of his domestic conduct. In France, he remained the king who betrayed a Bourbon princess, dishonored his vow, and committed crimes unworthy of Christendom. Yet revisionist waves would occasionally resurface. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Spanish historians re-examined Peter's rule with fresh eyes. They saw a monarch who, despite his faults, had sought to create a stronger, more centralized Castile. His judicial interventions, his protection of urban rights, and his resistance to papal overreach were re-evaluated as part of a broader movement toward state building. To some, Peter the Cruel became Peter the Lawgiver. To others, he remained a tyrant, but almost all agreed. He was a ruler of extraordinary complexity, shaped as much by the violent world around him as by any inner darkness. And yet, despite all nuance, the legend of the dinner persists. It is retold in plays, novels, documentaries. It fascinates because it combines the primal with the political, the idea that love, vengeance, and power can intersect at a dinner table with horrifying consequences. Whether the story was real, metaphor, or myth, it endures because it speaks to something timeless, the fear that those in power may someday turn their appetites toward us. And we won't realize it until it's too late. Peter of Castile, Peter the Cruel, has been judged by history as a tyrant, but beneath the cruelty lies a story of a ruler caught between chaos and ambition. He inherited a broken kingdom and sought to control it. He fought powerful nobles, foreign powers, and betrayal from within. But in choosing fear over trust, terror over diplomacy, Peter sowed the seeds of his own destruction. His life ended in blood, but his legacy lives on, not in monuments, not in reforms, but in a single, horrifying story. A story of dinner, of revenge, of a queen who ate her lover. True or not, it defines him. And perhaps that is the final cruelty. To be remembered not for your victories or visions, but for the moment you fed vengeance with silverware. Yet Peter's legacy, gruesome as it may be, is also a mirror. A mirror for the state, for the nature of monarchy, and for us. It raises enduring questions about the limits of power. How far can a ruler go before becoming monstrous? When does justice cross the line into spectacle? And what happens when the state becomes indistinguishable from the sovereign's personal vendettas? In an age where history often blurs with myth, Peter's story persists because it dramatizes timeless fears, that leaders may lose their humanity, that personal betrayal may shape national destiny, and that cruelty, once institutionalized, becomes not a scandal but a system. Modern leaders are rarely served their enemies for supper, but the metaphor still resonates. When power is unchecked, when paranoia rules, and when propaganda replaces principle, we edge closer to Peter's world, a court ruled by vengeance and a kingdom that dines on silence. So what remains of Peter the Cruel? Perhaps only this, a cautionary tale that continues to disturb. Centuries later, a man consumed by suspicion, by power, and ultimately by his own legend, a man whose name outlived his reign, not in admiration, but in warning. He tried to rule by fear. In the end, he was devoured by it.